For 20,000 years, humanity remained silent. Not by choice, but by fear that had stretched across generations. The silence was absolute. No signals left the planets, no messages were sent into the dark void beyond their system. Humanity had once reached for the stars with hope and curiosity, but that hope had been punished. The memory of what had happened to the earliest explorers, preserved in secret records and fragmented logs, was enough to keep every human from speaking across the expanse of space. The first explorers had ventured beyond the known planets with dreams of discovery. Their ships were small, fragile things compared to what later generations could have built. They carried messages meant for the stars, instruments to record what no human had ever seen, and hearts full of wonder. At first, nothing answered. Weeks turned into months, and still, the universe remained quiet. Then, something answered not with words, but with consequences. The records describe a sudden, violent disappearance. Ships vanished without trace. The few signals that made it back were garbled and strange, full of patterns that no one could decode. Scientists who tried to understand them were left unsettled. The messages hinted at vast intelligence, ancient and patient, one that did not communicate in the way humans understood. Something had watched humanity reach for the stars, and had judged it unwise for them to continue. Governments around the world quietly erased all signs of interstellar communication. Entire programs were shut down. Scientists were reassigned, projects buried. The early explorers became ghosts themselves, remembered only in hidden archives and whispered rumors. The lesson was clear. To call out into space was dangerous. To speak beyond the planets could invite disaster. Over the centuries, humanity adapted to this new reality. Space was no longer a frontier to conquer, but a horizon to observe from a distance. People built telescopes, satellites, and probes, but none carried words or signals. Astronomers watched the stars, noting patterns, tracking the movement of distant objects, but they never sent replies. Children grew up learning that silence was survival. Libraries recorded the history of the vanished explorers. But no one spoke of repeating their mistakes. Life on the planets changed in subtle ways because of this silence. Cultures that had once dreamed of interstellar travel focused inward, on their cities, their technologies, their societies. The arts flourished, the sciences advanced, but always with one unspoken rule: the universe was not to be disturbed. Stories of the stars became cautionary tales. The brightest minds learned to respect the unknown, to measure, observe, and analyze without calling attention to themselves. Fear had been replaced by caution, but it was still fear. Despite the long silence, curiosity never completely disappeared. Late at night, people would gaze at the stars and wonder if anyone or anything was out there. A few voices, hidden in secret corners, questioned why humanity could not reach out, why they had been so afraid. But these voices were rare and easily silenced. To speak of sending a signal was seen as reckless. The fear of drawing attention was deeply rooted in the human psyche. Technology continued to advance, but only within the limits of safety. Humans created machines that could explore distant planets, probe asteroid belts, and even chart nearby star systems. But these machines observed quietly, taking photographs, collecting samples, and sending data back to Earth with meticulous care. No transmissions broadcast into the wider universe. Humanity had learned to exist in the dark without being noticed. Generations passed. The memory of the vanished ships became legend. Ancient logs were preserved in high-security vaults, their meanings debated but never acted upon. Scientists studied the strange patterns left behind by the early explorers' signals, trying to understand what had happened. Some believed it was a natural phenomenon. Some imagined intelligent forces beyond comprehension. No one knew for certain. The silence was the safest answer. Despite the fear, there were moments of wonder. Occasionally, distant lights or strange anomalies appeared in telescopic data. A comet would behave oddly, or a faint flicker would cross the edge of a star's light. These phenomena were carefully recorded, analyzed, and filed. They sparked questions, brief flashes of imagination and sometimes hope, but they never led to contact. Humanity remained mute, cautious, and watchful. Life continued on Earth and its colonies. Cities grew, technology evolved, and society became more interconnected within the planets. Yet the stars remained distant, untouchable. Humanity learned to thrive in isolation, to respect the vastness of space without trying to fill it with their voice. Children studied astronomy, mathematics, and engineering, but always with the unspoken understanding that some knowledge was dangerous to share. The fear of the unknown had become a guiding principle. As centuries rolled into millennia, the silence shaped more than just behavior, it shaped thought. Philosophers, poets, and scientists all reflected the quiet nature of humanity in their work. Literature often spoke of listening rather than speaking, observing rather than acting. Music and art became meditative, focused on harmony and balance. Even language subtly shifted. Phrases that implied recklessness or ambition beyond the planets became less common. Humanity spoke less of what it could do and more of what it should not do. During all this time, the stars were not empty. They were watched by other eyes, ancient and patient, moving through the void on timescales humans could barely imagine. The early explorers had glimpsed something that humanity could not fully understand, something that measured civilizations by their actions, their curiosity, and their mistakes. Humanity's silence was a response to that unseen judgment, survival instinct on a cosmic scale. In hidden archives, fragments of data hinted at what had once existed. Ships that vanished without trace, signals that warped space and time, and strange mathematical patterns that made no sense to anyone alive. These fragments were studied obsessively by small groups of scientists, philosophers, and historians. They pieced together the story of humanity's first encounters with the unknown, and in doing so, they realized how close the species had come to extinction. The silence, though imposed by fear, had allowed humanity to survive. While other civilizations may have spoken too soon and disappeared, humans learned patience and caution. Knowledge accumulated quietly. Technology progressed, but without exposing itself. The species endured, shaped by caution and molded by the lessons of the past. Every observation, every cautious experiment, was a testament to the memory of those who had been lost. And yet, deep within human curiosity, the question never disappeared. Would silence always be enough? Could humanity truly avoid the unknown forever? Or was there a moment when the stars themselves would demand an answer? In this quiet age, with cities lit and telescopes trained on the infinite dark, humans waited, watched, and wondered. They waited for signs even as they promised themselves never to call out. Generations who lived and died during this long silence passed down stories, warnings, and glimpses of the vanished ships. Some saw these as myths, others as sacred truths. The culture of restraint became ingrained. People learned to cherish observation and understanding over ambition and expression. Humanity's identity was redefined. They were watchers, keepers of knowledge, silent but enduring. In this way, humanity survived for 20,000 years, a species cautious and quiet, aware that the universe was vast, intelligent, and not always forgiving. They looked at the stars every night, filled with wonder, and still spoke only in thoughts and whispers, never sending signals, never daring to announce their presence. And in that silence, they endured, waiting for a day when perhaps they would finally hear back from the cosmos, or when the cosmos would choose to speak to them. The first sign was subtle. A small anomaly appeared in a telescope's readings, so faint that most scientists dismissed it at first. It was a drifting object, far beyond any known orbit, moving against the familiar patterns of stars. At first, the object seemed ordinary, perhaps a piece of rock or debris from a long-vanished comet. But as days passed and instruments recorded more data, it became clear that it was not natural. It had structure, purpose, presence that could not be explained by chance. News of the anomaly spread quietly among the scientific community. Those in charge of the most advanced observatories held emergency meetings in hushed tones. There was no panic, only cautious curiosity. because humanity had learned long ago that rushing to conclusions in space could be dangerous. Still, every mind that considered the data felt the same stirring of excitement and fear. It was unlike anything seen before. The object was enormous. Its surface reflected light in strange ways, as though it were coated with materials that did not exist on any known planet or asteroid. Instruments detected patterns, sharp lines, and angles that suggested it had been built, not formed. Yet the design did not match anything modern humans had constructed. It resembled the earliest deep space vessels from records kept in secret archives, though magnified and warped over time. Even more unsettling was its movement. The object did not orbit a star. It did not drift randomly. It traveled with intention, moving slowly but steadily toward human space. Every calculation confirmed it was coming, though no one could explain why. The ghost ship had returned. Governments were informed, but the announcements were muted, classified, and given only to those who had to know. A global council of scientists, engineers, and historians convened in secure facilities, reviewing centuries of forbidden archives. They compared the anomaly to the lost ships from 20,000 years ago. The similarities were too precise to ignore. This was not a coincidence. Humanity had not simply forgotten its past. Something had chosen to remind them. The news leaked slowly, first to the most trusted media channels, then to the wider public. Fear and fascination spread. People stared at the night sky with renewed intensity. The stars, once silent witnesses, seemed suddenly alive. Children pointed to lights in the distance, wondering if they were seeing the same object as the scientists. Adults remembered the old stories, whispered legends of ships lost without trace, and felt unease stir in their hearts. As instruments collected more data, the anomaly revealed further mysteries. It emitted no radio signals, no energy that could be measured by any known sensor. Traditional detection methods, designed to measure engines, heat, or propulsion, failed. The ghost ship moved silently, as though it were part of space itself. And yet, despite its lack of detectable power, it maintained speed and trajectory with precision. Every observation suggested intelligence, but not the kind humanity had known. The scientific council debated endlessly. Some believed it was a natural object behaving in ways impossible to replicate on Earth. Others insisted it was artificial, that its return carried a message, a warning, or perhaps a test. All agreed on one thing: humanity could not ignore it. For 20,000 years, humans had remained mute. Now, mute or not, they were being watched, or at least observed. A deeper analysis revealed more anomalies. The ship's structure seemed to phase subtly in and out of detectable dimensions. Instruments sometimes failed to record its edges, as if part of it existed in a space humans could not perceive. Shadows bent strangely across its surface, and light reflected in ways that defied conventional physics. The more scientists observed, the less certain they were of its nature. It was massive, alien, yet somehow familiar. It was humanity's past, and perhaps its judgment, returning at last. The reaction among humans varied. Some panicked quietly, fearful that the silence humanity had maintained for millennia had ended too soon. They remembered the stories of vanished civilizations and the idea that curiosity alone could be deadly. Others felt awe. They had spent lifetimes learning to watch the stars, and now the stars were responding. A ghost of the past had returned, and it was more real than any legend could have described. Military agencies prepared, though they understood little could be done. Weapons and defenses seemed insignificant against an object that ignored known laws of motion and matter. Even the most advanced fleets could not approach it safely. The ghost ship moved in a way that suggested understanding, not aggression. Yet the possibility of danger could not be dismissed. Humanity had learned to respect the unknown. To act too soon might be fatal. Historians and archivists pored over records trying to understand what the ghost ship meant. Ancient transmissions, hidden logs, and forbidden messages from early explorers were revisited. Patterns emerged, hints of knowledge that had been buried intentionally. The ship resembled the vessels humanity had sent into the void millennia ago. Yet it was larger, more complex, and imbued with a strange presence. It carried no crew, at least none that could be detected, but it was alive with purpose. Scientists speculated about its cargo. Could it hold survivors from the earliest explorers? Could it carry information from a civilization that had judged humanity's ancestors? Theories multiplied, each more speculative than the last. But none could be confirmed. Humanity was confronted with a puzzle designed to test patience, observation, and perhaps even morality. The ghost ship was not simply a machine. It was a statement, and the universe was forcing humans to listen without words. In the public sphere, curiosity surged. People watched the sky with instruments, homemade telescopes, and binoculars. Videos were shared online, discussions exploded on forums, and a quiet hope stirred that humanity might finally reconnect with its forgotten past. And yet, fear remained. Every story from the vanished fleets reminded people of what had been lost, what could be lost again. Humanity had survived by silence. Now that silence was challenged, and uncertainty weighed heavily. The ghost ship approached slowly, crossing distances measured in millions of kilometers. Space agencies coordinated observations, recording every detail. Scientists noticed small anomalous gravity waves that did not match known patterns, magnetic fluctuations, and brief bursts of energy that could not be explained. These were not weapons or signals, but subtle distortions, patterns suggesting intelligence beyond comprehension. Humans could feel it, even if they could not fully understand it. As the object drew closer, its form became clearer. Holes, compartments, and structures emerged from the blur of space. They were ancient yet sophisticated, constructed from materials unknown to humans, and shaped in ways that echoed early designs, but surpassed them in scale and precision. There were symbols etched into the surfaces, patterns that hinted at meaning. The ghost ship was not just a vessel. It was a message, one that humanity could not yet read. The psychological effect on humans was profound. For the first time in 20,000 years, they felt a connection to the past, to the explorers who had vanished, and to the universe that had silently judged them. Fear and wonder intertwined. Humans experienced a mixture of nostalgia, awe, and a deep, unshakable awareness that the cosmos was far older and more intelligent than anyone had ever imagined. Even in silence, humanity could sense the presence of the ghost ship. Observers reported unusual feelings while tracking its sudden clarity of thought, strange emotions, and a sense that the vessel understood them, that it had waited for this moment for millennia. Scientists recorded these reactions carefully, unsure if they were physiological, psychological, or influenced by some unknown property of the ship. But the consensus was clear. The ghost ship was more than a machine by now. Governments had assembled task forces to respond if necessary, but none expected conflict. The ghost ship did not behave aggressively. It did not emit signals meant to communicate in conventional ways. Instead, it drifted with purpose, silently, inexorably, as though testing humanity, measuring patience, or reminding them of lessons long forgotten. For 20,000 years, humans had remained mute. Now, they were confronted with the return of what they had once lost. The world watched. The ghost ship became a symbol of human history, fear, and curiosity. Its return rekindled debates about exploration, survival, and humanity's place in the universe. Some questioned whether they should reach out, whether to send a signal, or remain silent as before. Others argued that silence could no longer protect them. The ghost ship had crossed the void to remind humanity of its past, and perhaps to challenge it about its future, and so humanity waited. Scientists observed, governments prepared, and ordinary people looked up at the stars with a mixture of fear and hope. The ghost ship moved slowly through space, carrying with it memories, warnings, and perhaps the first signs of communication in 20,000 years. Every observation, every calculation, every careful recording was a testament to the species' enduring patience, caution, and curiosity. The silence that had lasted for millennia was broken, not by words, but by presence. The universe had responded in a way that humans could feel, but not yet fully understand. And though the ghost ship remained distant, its existence was undeniable. It was a reminder that humanity had once reached for the stars, that it had been punished for doing so, and that now it could no longer remain entirely silent. The mystery of the ghost ship was just beginning. Observers knew it would not reveal its purpose easily. It carried secrets of the past, warnings for the present, and perhaps guidance for the future. Humanity had survived by silence, but now, for the first time in 20,000 years, the species faced a presence from the void that demanded attention, patience, and understanding, and in every observation, in every quiet moment spent watching the stars, humans felt the weight of history, the pressure of survival, and the strange thrill of knowing that the universe was watching back. The ghost ship was more than a vessel. It was a bridge across time, a reminder of what had been lost, and a herald of what might come next. Humanity had been mute for 20,000 years, and now, at last, they were forced to confront the return of something they had never truly forgotten. As the ghost ship drifted closer, strange phenomena began to ripple across human space. At first, there were minor small disruptions in satellite communications, minor fluctuations in orbital paths, faint anomalies in data from distant probes. Scientists noticed patterns, but they did not understand their meaning. The disturbances were precise, almost deliberate, yet no conventional signal could be detected. It was as if the ship communicated without speaking, without energy, without sound. Researchers called it the silence within the silence. Humanity had remained mute for 20,000 years, carefully avoiding signals into the void. And now, something was responding not with words but with influence. Devices would flicker in ways that mirrored the ghost ship's movements. Sensors recorded anomalies that appeared mathematical, almost like a language, though no one could read it. It was a communication without sound, a message without letters, and it unsettled everyone who observed it. The first to notice the full pattern were the mathematicians and linguists assigned to the task. They pored over weeks of sensor data, satellite logs, and deep space readings. At first it seemed random. Then a shape began to appear, a rhythm embedded in the disturbances. The ghost ship's movements created interference in space that repeated itself in fractals, spirals, and sequences that could be measured but not spoken aloud. It was both familiar and alien, structured yet impossible to decode fully. Scientists ran simulations trying to reproduce the effects. Nothing worked. The ship did not follow known physical laws, and yet everything it did obeyed some system beyond comprehension. The more they analyzed, the more convinced they became that the ghost ship was intentionally sending messages, though not in any form humanity had ever experienced. It was as if the universe itself was speaking through the vessel. Meanwhile, ordinary people began noticing strange occurrences on their own. Power grids fluctuated subtly in synchronization with reports from observatories. Clocks, computers, and communication devices experienced minor anomalies, enough to be noticed, but not harmful. Psychologists documented unusual emotional responses among people who closely watched the skies. A sense of awareness of being observed seemed to touch everyone in varying degrees. Humans were not merely observing the ghost ship, was observing them. The patterns were everywhere, yet nowhere. People reported seeing lights flicker in their homes when the ship passed overhead. Instruments recorded distortions in magnetic fields that mirrored the ship's position. Even gravity sensors picked up fluctuations so subtle that most engineers dismissed them as errors. Though they were consistent across vast distances, the ship seemed alive, not in the sense of biological life, but as an intelligence that extended its presence into the environment itself as the weeks passed. Scientists realized that the ship's messages were not random disturbances, they were encoded. The effects followed rules, repeating sequences, mathematical ratios, and arrangements that hinted at logic and understanding. The message was not meant to be read in a traditional sense. It was meant to be experienced. Humanity had grown accustomed to communication through speech and writing. This was a communication through patterns, through subtlety, through resonance. The discovery divided opinion. Some argued that humanity should respond immediately, sending signals back, despite the long history of caution. Others insisted that responding could provoke unknown consequences. They recalled the lessons of 20,000 years of silence and feared that any action could invite disaster. The ship was not just a relic of the past. It was a test, a measurement of patience, understanding, and restraint. In observation centers, teams of scientists worked around the clock. They mapped every fluctuation, every anomaly, and every subtle interference. They used artificial intelligence, complex simulations, and new methods of pattern recognition. Yet the ghost ship always stayed one step ahead. Every attempt to force it into a predictable system failed. It was a presence that defied simple categorization, neither hostile nor friendly, neither alive nor dead in any conventional sense. Some scientists began experiencing personal effects as well. Sleep patterns changed. Thoughts felt sharper yet more fluid. Intuition heightened. Small visions of distant landscapes, strange structures, and impossible geometry would appear in dreams. Some began to suspect that the ghost ship was affecting human consciousness directly, not just sensors and machines. It was a presence that could reach across space and touch the mind. This realization unsettled the leadership of the task forces. Humanity had avoided danger for millennia by staying quiet, by not drawing attention. Now, the ghost ship had bypassed every precaution, reaching beyond mere observation into influence. It was a force that required careful study, patience, and humility. Every decision mattered, and yet there was no precedent for how to respond. Historians revisited old records, hoping that fragments of the past could provide guidance. The vanished fleets, the lost signals, the early explorers' warnings all hinted at a pattern. Humanity had once attempted to communicate, and the consequences had been catastrophic. The ghost ship's return was consistent with those warnings. It carried memory, judgment, and perhaps a final opportunity to understand. Among the patterns, one particularly curious phenomenon emerged. Small disturbances in distant probes formed sequences that could be interpreted as numbers, then as ratios, and eventually as repeating cycles resembling primitive language. Analysts spent weeks attempting to translate the signals, using every method available. The results were maddeningly incomplete, fragments of meaning that hinted at history, instruction and caution, but nothing direct. The ghost ship did not speak. It suggested the emotional weight on humans was palpable. Scientists reported feelings of awe, mixed with dread. Every day brought new insights, yet the full purpose remained elusive. People who observed the ship closely began to feel a collective awareness, a subtle understanding that humanity had been watched for millennia. It was not merely technology observing technology. It was intelligence, observing intelligence, time measuring time. Humanity's silence was no longer sufficient. They'd been measured, and now they were being informed. Some researchers suggested that the ship's effects could be a test. It seemed to measure restraint, curiosity, patience, and caution. It nudged humans into patterns of thought, forcing them to analyze, collaborate, and consider consequences. The disturbances were puzzles, challenges meant to teach or remind. Those who observed closely began to understand that the ship was not aggressive, but it was not neutral either. It demanded attention, not confrontation. Outside the scientific community, society responded in subtle ways. People reported feelings of connection across continents, of shared intuition and insight. A collective awareness emerged, as if humanity itself were being gently guided to observe, reflect, and understand without action. Art, literature, and media began to reflect the ship's presence, often without conscious intent. Stories, songs, and images carried patterns echoing the anomalies observed in space. As though humanity's creative mind was absorbing the ship's influence unconsciously. The ghost ship continued its journey. Moving closer, but never entering the inner planet's orbits, its presence was constant, yet ephemeral. Instruments and observations were never complete, always revealing more questions than answers. It carried echoes of humanity's past, hints of forgotten knowledge, and the subtle insistence that humans pay attention in new ways. Every anomaly, every flicker, every pattern was a reminder that humanity had been silent. and that silence could no longer fully protect them, as weeks became months. The ghost ship's subtle effects intensified. Satellites experienced small shifts that could not be explained by known physics. Light passing near the ship bent in unusual ways. Gravity sensors fluctuated. Magnetic fields twisted. Small pulses of energy, undetectable by conventional methods, appeared and repeated. These were not threats, yet they were undeniable. Humanity could not ignore them, and they could not be explained. The ship communicated, but it demanded understanding, not reply. In laboratories around the world, scientists began to work together in unprecedented ways. They shared data openly, coordinated observations, and combined analytical techniques. Humanity's long history of caution gave way to collaboration. The ghost ship's subtle influence forced them to adapt, to think collectively, and to recognize that understanding could not be achieved in isolation. It was teaching patience, observation, and humility. Even as patterns emerged, full comprehension remained impossible. The ship's communication was multidimensional, blending mathematics, physics, and subtle consciousness. Analysts reported experiences that blurred the lines between reality and perception. Dreams and visions became tools of understanding. Minds began to absorb patterns before words could form. Humanity was learning to listen without hearing, to understand without explanation. The emotional impact of the ghost ship was profound. People felt awe at its complexity, fear at its incomprehensibility, and hope at its apparent guidance. Humanity had survived 20,000 years of silence, but now it faced a presence that could not be ignored. The ghost ship was not a threat in the conventional sense, yet it demanded response. It demanded patience, understanding, and attention in ways humans had never been asked to provide before. In the end, the ghost ship's subtle messages reshaped human thought. Observers reported insights into physics, mathematics, and even philosophy that they could not explain. Problems that had confounded genera. Taion seemed clearer when approached in the context of the patterns emanating from the ship. It was teaching without speaking, guiding without touching, revealing without giving. Humanity was learning to perceive the universe in ways it had forgotten. The ghost ship continued to drift closer, silent, powerful, and mysterious. Its presence rippled across human space, shaping thought, observation, and collaboration. Humanity had been mute for 20,000 years, and now, for the first time in millennia, they were confronted with a presence that communicated in ways beyond sound, sight, or understanding. The universe was speaking through the ghost ship, and humanity was finally beginning to listen. And as they listened, the subtle messages began to form something coherent, not words, not instructions, but understanding. Patterns in gravity, magnetism, and energy coalesced into meaning. Humans realized that the ghost ship carried memory, not merely of itself, but of humanity's past. It reminded them of what had been lost, what had been preserved, and what could be learned if they paid attention. The lessons were simple in concept, but complex in execution. Observe, reflect, and understand. Humanity had survived by silence for 20,000 years. Now, they were learning to survive by comprehension. The ghost ship did not demand obedience. It demanded awareness. It did not threaten. It instructed, and as humans watched, calculated, and absorbed, they began to realize that the universe was not silent, and that their own silence had always been a conversation waiting to resume. As the ghost ship moved closer, humanity began to confront truths that had been buried for millennia. Observatories and laboratories were flooded with data, and patterns that had seemed meaningless suddenly connected in ways that defied previous understanding. It was as though the ship carried memory, not just of itself, but of humanity's earliest history, a history that had been erased, hidden, and almost forgotten. Archivists and historians sifted through forbidden records, piecing together fragments of transmissions, logs, and observations from the first deep space missions. The stories were chilling. Humanity had not simply abandoned interstellar travel by choice. The first explorers had encountered something ancient, something vast, and something that had judged their curiosity as dangerous. Entire fleets vanished without a trace, and the signals that did return were warped and fragmented, carrying warnings disguised as incomprehensible patterns. The ghost ship now moved like a bridge between past and present. It carried these records not as physical data alone, but in forms that affected human perception, consciousness, and understanding. Scientists noticed that, as they analyzed the ship's subtle signals, certain anomalies mirrored patterns found in the lost archives. It was as though the ship was guiding humanity to rediscover what had been erased, to remember what had been forbidden. The first realization was terrifying. The silent centuries were not merely the result of fear or caution, they had been survival mechanisms. Imposed by knowledge too dangerous to share, humanity's ancestors had learned the hard way that reaching beyond certain limits could draw the attention of entities far older, far more powerful than any human civilization. The early explorers' mistakes had nearly doomed the species, and their survivors had enforced silence for generations. Humanity had not simply chosen quiet. It had been compelled by forces beyond comprehension. The ghost ship made this clear through subtle influence. Instruments recorded shifts in gravitational fields and electromagnetic patterns that aligned with the messages from the lost fleets. Analysts realized that these were not random anomalies, they were warnings. The ship carried data about civilizations that had spoken too soon. Civilizations that had vanished because they failed to heed the limits imposed by forces that humans could barely perceive. The universe was not a passive space. It was a place that judged exposure, that demanded restraint, and that acted decisively when rules were broken. Psychologists, studying observers of the ghost ship, noted remarkable changes in human behavior. Individuals reported heightened awareness, a sense of responsibility, and an instinctive understanding that the universe measured actions and consequences in ways humans could not fully grasp. Teams working with the data began thinking collectively, reasoning more clearly, and coordinating more effectively than ever before. The ghost ship's influence was subtle but profound. It did not force humans to act. It demanded comprehension, attention, and reflection. As the pieces of history were reconstructed, the scale of humanity's survival became evident. For 20,000 years, humans had avoided contact because the memory of punishment was encoded into the species itself. Entire societies had been conditioned to respect silence. Exploration had been cautious, communication minimal, and expansion carefully measured. The ghost ship confirmed what historians suspected. Humanity had survived where others had not because it had learned restraint. Silence had been its shield, patience its weapon. Yet now, the ghost ship suggested that silence alone might no longer be sufficient. Its presence in human space, the subtle manipulations of instruments, and the effects on consciousness all indicated that a new phase had begun. The universe had noticed humanity again, and it was no longer content with mere observation. There was a message waiting to be understood, a history demanding acknowledgement, and a future that required careful preparation. Scientists working to decode. The ship's patterns discovered hints of enormous intelligence, ancient and patient. The signals implied that earlier civilizations were not destroyed by force, but removed from existence in a manner that left no trace. Observation, measurement, and punishment had been executed across eons with precision. Those civilizations that had broadcast themselves, that had made their presence known too openly, were gone. Humanity had survived because it had remained mute, careful, and hidden. The realization was humbling. Survival had not been a result of skill alone, but of restraint. The subtlety of the ghost ship's message became more apparent over time. Its movements, the shifts in energy fields, and the patterns transmitted to instruments across space all carried layers of information. These were not words and not conventional instructions, but structured suggestions. Analysts could trace cycles, ratios, and sequences that hinted at historical events, scientific principles, and warnings about the consequences of exposure. It was a message embedded in the very fabric of space, demanding patience, analysis, and comprehension. Some of the revelations were deeply personal. Researchers reported flashes of memory that did not belong to them, visions of ships drifting silently through the void, of explorers lost and fearful, and of civilizations that had vanished without trace. These memories felt real, tangible, and often overwhelming. People realized that the ghost ship carried consciousness in some form, not alive in a human sense, but aware, capable of transmitting understanding across millennia. Humanity was not merely observing. It was interacting with the echoes of past intelligence, a consciousness that had endured far longer than human memory. Governments and agencies struggled to respond. The ghost ship was neither threat nor invader. Weapons, defenses, and fleets were irrelevant. Humanity's only option was comprehension. The task forces focused on observation, data analysis, and collaboration. Specialists in physics, mathematics, psychology, and history worked together in ways never attempted before. The species had survived 20,000 years of silence, and now it had to survive by understanding the universe itself, a challenge far greater than any technology could solve alone. The global impact was profound. Media reported anomalies without full explanation. Citizens felt the presence of the ship in subtle ways, disturbances in electronics, strange visual patterns in the sky, and even emotional shifts in those who watched closely. Humanity, which had long considered itself the observer, realized for the first time that it was part of a conversation it had never fully understood. Silence had been survival, but now listening, perceiving, and interpreting had become essential. Historians reconstructed accounts of the earliest explorers, drawing connections between lost signals, vanished fleets, and the warnings encoded in the ghost ship's patterns. One thread became clear: civilizations that ignored the rules of exposure did not vanish because of conflict. They were removed because they failed to understand their place in the cosmos. The universe enforced restraint, observation, and patience as much as it did communication and action. Humanity had survived, but only barely, and the ghost ship now reminded them of the fragile balance that had been maintained for 20,000 years in laboratories around the world. Teams began developing methods to engage with the subtle signals more effectively. Simulations, quantum analysis, and advanced pattern recognition became essential tools. Slowly, they began to see layers of meaning that suggested timelines, historical events, and potential instructions. Yet complete comprehension remained impossible. The ghost ship did not provide answers outright. It demanded interpretation, reflection, and careful collaboration. It was teaching the species to think in ways it had never needed to before. The psychological effects were not limited to scientists. Ordinary people reported subtle shifts in awareness, intuition, and perception. Dreams carried fragments of information, sometimes